What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the train. Today I'm going to be showing how we put together this massive solid walnut bar top. It's over 16 feet long. It turned out absolutely gorgeous, so be sure to check this video out, guys. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Let's go ahead and dive into the video. Okay, so we started off by sourcing this 8-quarter walnut lumber, and you can see these boards are pretty long, pretty thick. Each one of those was about $300, $200 to $300 a piece, so that kind of gives you an idea of the scale and also expense of this project. So to start off, we stabilized some of the knots. There were a few areas that had knots or just small voids. So first what we did is just put some penetrating epoxy in those, and then we later came back and just filled that just so that all those knots were stabilized and also flat if they were going to be on the top side. From there we could start to jointing one edge. Now this is where a track saw becomes extremely useful, so we were able to connect a few tracks together to give us the appropriate length, and we could come through, and usually we did this in 2 passes, so we'd go about half the thickness and then do a finishing pass, and that gave us a nice clean edge and a nice straight edge, which would be very difficult unless you had a very long jointer, with very long infeed and outfeed, which we don't. So once we had a straight edge jointed on all these boards, we could take them to the table saw to get the other edge parallel. Now this was definitely a 2-man effort here. These boards were very heavy. Some of them were as much as about 12 feet long, and so you definitely needed people, holding on the outfeed and 1 to feed into the saw. And after much more time than you saw there, we had these boards milled up. Luckily, they came very flat, and the faces were very parallel from the lumber mill, so we didn't have to, fuss with planing them. And we also didn't want to lose pretty much any of the thickness if possible, because we wanted the bar top to be as thick as it could be. So in order to start these glue ups, we are using the domino here. This is going to help with the alignment especially, and also help just keep these from bowing and staying flat during the glue up process. And so you can see we put a good amount on there, and we also shaved down the dominoes on a few of them just so that they weren't super snug. If you put this domino to the loose setting, in my opinion, it's way too loose, so instead we just shaved down some of the dominoes to give us that more slightly loose fit. So here what we're doing is gluing up part of the middle of the bar top. Basically this bar top's going to have a sink in the middle, and there's going to be 2 16-foot boards stretching the front and back, and then 2 of these middle portions. So this is part of the middle portion. And now, because of course we can't source a 16-foot long board as that front and back rail, what we have to do is actually join 2 boards on end to give us the proper length. Now this was definitely one of the major challenges other than the scale of this project, and the reason is, of course, end grain to end grain joints are pretty much a very weak joint, and so you need some sort of physical connection there in order to get this durable and sturdy. And after a lot of experimenting just on some sample pieces, what we ended up going with was a draw bore half lap joint. And so we are going to use the draw bore for 2 reasons. One, it's going to draw the edges and the corners or the shoulder lines together, and 2, it's just going to be a very strong pinned joint when it's done. Now we use the draw bore because of course we can't clamp 16 feet worth of board, at least not with any of the clamps we have, and so we're going to rely on the mechanical advantage of the joint itself, the draw bore, to draw this nice and tight, which you'll see in a second here. So first we use a track saw to just put lots of little kerfs into the waist and knock out the bulk of it with a chisel, and then we can come back just with a rabbet plane there and clean up right into that edge. And to get that very little nib out of the corner, I just come through with a chisel just to make sure it's nice and there's nothing that's going to get the joint hung up, because it's crucial here that these shoulder lines come nice and tightly together. Otherwise that's going to be a very visible seam, and we just can't have that. So here we're working on the other half, same thing. We clear out the waist with the track saw and then the chisel. And then here we actually came through with this little jig set up with the router so that we could get very close to our scribe line just with a straight bit. That basically just saved us a lot of time with the rabbet plane. Now the rabbet plane still was used after this just to finalize the surface, because it does such a good job at that. Now on this one, after we had gotten here, we realized that The end there was slightly out of square with the edge, and so we just propped this up on the shooting board by supporting the outfeed there on a roller stand, and then getting the joint here up on the shooting board, and we were able to just clean up that and make it nice and square. And here you can see coming through with the rabbet planes, just get that final surface, because the router still leaves just a very slightly wavy surface, and we were able to creep up on the fit with the rabbet plane. And we didn't show the drilling process here, but those holes are basically slightly offset from each other by about a 32nd of an inch. And then these tapered pins or tapered dowels get hammered in there. And what that does is it just draws that joint together, and it's really amazing how it works. If you've never used a draw bore, you should try it out because it's pretty spectacular. So again, all we had to do was apply vertical pressure here on the clamps, and then due to that tapered pin in the offset holes, it drives them together. And here you can see this ridiculously long board that we end up with. I think it was about 21 feet after this glue up. Now, of course, we're going to cut that to 16, but we didn't want to cut anything short until we were definitely ready, so we just left it long. And here you can see how nice and tight that shoulder line came together. So after giving that plenty of time to dry, we didn't, of course, don't want to pick that up before it's completely cured. We could just trim those dowels away, and then we could trim away the waste, or basically clean up the glue edge. And this was a really cool process because now we could get rid of that rough edge and then be left with what was our joint. And you can see here that that half lap comes together just absolutely beautifully, really clean joint. And basically we needed to do 2 of those, one for the front and one for the back. Now, before gluing these very long rails to those middle portions, there was just a lot of fine tuning to make sure that these edges were sitting dead flat together. So I come through with the block plane just to make sure that the edge is completely square with the top face of the bar top. And with that ensured, we could come back with the domino and do the mortises on the full 16-foot board here. So again, this is actually a little over 16 feet. We're leaving everything large. And then we could come through and begin the next glue up. So you could use dowels here, but the dominoes or dowels really help get that aligned and really help keep this flat. You also want to make sure that you're alternating directions on your clamps just to make sure you don't introduce any bow during the glue up. Of course, these boards are so thick and stiff, you're probably not going to do that, but it's better to just do it the correct way. So here you can see the front rail's been attached, and we have the 2 middle sections, and then there's a void there in the center because that's all going to be waste where the sink is cut out. And so we could save some lumber by not doing full 16-foot segments in those middle boards. And then we had the whole thing finally glued together, and we could come through and start truing up to the final dimensions. Now, we were of course very careful on this to make sure that the final dimension would fit the cabinet setup and fit the overhang that we're going to be doing on this. And once that was cut mostly the size, we brought it to a local cabinet shop where they were able to send it to their wide belt sander. Now, this was an extremely good thing to do because we could have tried to do this by hand, but I'm sure it would have taken us a very long time and not gotten as good as a result of the wide belt sander. So this ensured a nice dead flat bar top, and amazingly, to get both sides flat, we only had to take off 0.1 inches, which is really amazing. It just, attests to how well we were able to control those glue ups. After that, here we can see cleaning up that joint again. We're left with that beautiful half lap joint. You can hardly notice it due to the grain match and then just the clean joint that comes together. And then we could cut both ends to their final dimension. So I think it was just over 16 feet long when you include the 1.5 inch overhang on each side of the cabinets. So now was one of the parts we were definitely dreading, because at this point we had a beautiful looking bar top, and we had to now just cut into it in order to cut for the sink. Now, normally this would be pretty easy if you're doing a drop-in sink. Of course, you can leave a somewhat rough edge and the top of the sink will just completely cover that. But in this case, the client wanted the sink to be undermount, and so basically what that meant is we had to be extremely precise with this hole we were making for the sink. And so after doing a series of templates and triple checking that the template was going to be correct, you can see we used a series of flush trim bits in order to creep up on the final sink dimension. And we started with a series that just stepped us down by about a 1/4 inch of a time to make sure we weren't taking off too much material at once and didn't get any kick or anything that would ruin that sink cutout. So with the sink cutout complete, we could come through and cut these mortises for some C-channel, which would go on the underside of the bar top. Now these are probably unneeded in this case since these are 4 planks coming together and there's really not much chance they're going to bow, but just to ensure longevity of this bar top, we did cut out these and cut some C-channel to put in there. If anything, it's just going to add to the robustness of this bar top. So after that, we could do the sanding, which thankfully, because there was 2 of us, actually took less time than I initially expected, and we sanded the entire thing up to about 220 grit. And once we were done that, we came through it and added some bevels here to the 2 front corners, and this was just to match the profile of the front of the cabinets. It also really gives just a nice aesthetic look to the front of the bar top. So with it sanded, we could come through and just do the profiling. So a small round over was added to the front edge and the inside of the sink cutout. And overall just came through with a lot of hand sanding and just knocking down any rough edges and making sure everything was nice and smooth to the touch. And after a very long time of a lot of hours put into this, we were able to finally start doing the finish. Now the client wanted to do water locks in order to match some previously installed floating shelves that were above this, which you'll see at the end. So we're using I believe it was the semi-gloss water locks, and it's just an oil-based varnish, so it's pretty simple to apply just by hand. And we ended up building about 3 coats on the bottom, 5 coats on the top. Here you can really see that joint start to pop. And now that the finish is on, you can see again just how clean that joinery came together, those really crisp joint lines. Now this is the underside, you won't see those dowels on the top side. So right now we'd finished the underside, but there is still some really cool looking grain. You can see some of these wavy X's popping. It was just really cool to see it finally get revealed here. Now in between coats, I came through with some of the 3M micro mesh, I believe it's called. This is the maroon pad and the steel wool, synthetic steel wool, and that just knocks it down to prepare for the next coat of finish. Here we're putting in these C-channels, and you can see there's elongated slots for those screws just to allow for any wood movement, make sure that it doesn't get hung up and cause a split of any kind. And here, captured on video, the final turn of this bar top, final time we had to flip this thing over. It was definitely good to not have to do that anymore. We were always nervous something bad would happen, but now we flipped this to the top side. You can just see how gorgeous this is. There's very little sapwood on the top, and overall the grain match is very good, and it's just a gorgeous bar top. So here we're applying the very last coat of finish, and we used foam brushes for this just to help get rid of any streak marks, and the foam brushes seem to work better than the rags. The rags were also occasionally leaving some dusty nubs on there. So here's a final shot of the top here before the final install and delivery, guys. So thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this video. This was a really fun build. Thank you for Lucas to doing this with me. And now let's go on and take a look at some of the final shots.